Hello, Bill.
Hello, Matt. Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome to the frozen tundra of the DMZ, everyone.
Is it cold down there?
It's been brutal down here. I think it's the coldest it's been in decades in terms of just, day after day of teens. Temperatures in the teens. It's going to warm up a little bit this weekend. 50 is going to feel like I'm in South Florida, so I'm excited about that. And by the way, when you have kids, this does matter. When they can't get outside, all sorts of things you don't think about, but we've got it creates issues.
Well, I don't know what it's like in D.C. In New England, my oldest is in two different preschools. And pretty much as a rule, they will be outside no matter what. I think there have been a few days this year where it's been so cold, below zero wind chill, where they said, that's not safe, or or there's so much ice outside, they said it's not safe. But generally speaking, the attitude is, you're at school, you're going to be outside at some point of the day, bundle up. I'm soft. I'm not. I mean, they're playing. Their snow's been on the ground, and I've said, she's gone sledding at school already. I don't need to take her out sledding. I don't need to have that magical parental moment. Let's just stay inside and chill out. She is growing up hardier, I think, than I did, if I can remember. But maybe it's what happens all over the country, and I'm kidding myself that we're especially tough here in Western Massachusetts.
Well, we tried this weekend. We tried to take them out to the Tyson's Corner Mall, where they have like an indoor playground. Of course, it was closed. They picked this time of year to sort of redo it. So instead, I got on a little train, and rode around the mall with my son, so that it wasn't a complete waste. So, they couldn't have planned that for June. They had to shut down the indoor playground in January. So anyway, that's been. So I'm looking forward to the thawing of tensions in the DMZ and the thawing of temperatures.
Now it is Super Bowl weekend. I know DMZ fans are actually waiting for your Super Bowl picks. The elements of it will not be an issue. It is going to warm up. The notions of a big blizzard making them change the day, I think, is off the table. Where does Matt come down?
Well, first of all, nobody knows, and if I'm right, it's going to be more gut instinct or luck, and if I'm wrong, I suspect it'll be the same. I am picking the Seattle Seahawks to defeat the Denver Broncos in the Super Bowl.
You do not genuflect at the altar of Peyton Manning.
No, it seems I'm sort of rooting for him. And that is sort of the storybook ending to the season, is for Peyton Manning to win, for the Broncos to win, and Peyton Manning to have come back, from that injury a couple years ago. And that's part of the reason I'm not picking them, because the storybook ending is just too neat. It's too nice. The world would never allow that to happen. And there's something about Peyton Manning that, even though his stats are amazing and he's one of the winningest, quarterbacks, there's still something about him that I don't trust. That the choking thing, the thing where can he rise to the occasion? I know he has one Super Bowl ring. This would make it two. So it's not like he's a schlemiel, but I just don't trust him, and so that's why I'm going Seattle.
Well, I bet that deep down most people want Seattle to win because they want to see, Richard Sherman give a great post-game speech afterwards. I don't think I bet most people don't look at him as some kind of negative influence on society. I mean, it's fun. People who are brash are fun.
Well, I think it's he's modeling off Muhammad Ali, and people went to see Ali because they wanted to see him win and because they wanted to see him lose. And whether you loved him or hated him, you wanted to see him. So I do think that Sherman did cast, in my opinion, now maybe I'm not the average fan, but in my opinion, he cast himself as the heel, like in pro wrestling. the villain. And so I see the Seahawks as being sort of the team of darkness, and the Broncos as being like the sort of more all-American conservative team. And, you know, for that reason, I suspect that the evil team will win. So it's a pessimistic instinct to believe that the Seahawks, which are now, I think, cast in my book at least, cast as the villains, will defeat the. And Peyton Manning sort of got that good old boy thing going, which doesn't necessarily. I'm more a Tom Brady guy. I was rooting for the Patriots, as you'll recall, to beat the Broncos, but I think the Seahawks are now sort of cast as somebody. I think it was Bill Maher, who I think astutely pointed out that like liberals will probably be rooting for the Seahawks, and conservatives will be probably rooting for the Broncos. And like I know there are tons of exceptions to that rule, but I do think Maher was onto something. Like generally speaking, and I think it's because Richard Sherman's sort of showboating, I think, will rub some conservatives the wrong way, and I think that conservatives will like the Peyton Manning sort of all shucks, good old boy shtick or whatever it is. I'm not saying it's phony, and I do want to say too, at least for me, it's certainly not about race. I mean, like I think that Congressman Grimm or whatever, who threatened to throw that poor reporter off the balcony. That guy's a thug. No matter the color of his skin, that congressman is a thug. And so I'm just generally opposed to these outbursts, regardless of who's making them. So, and Grimm was a Republican. It should be noted. So.
Well, I mean, isn't the Republican Party the party of showboaters? Ted Cruz, Rand Paul. I mean, when you showboat, you catapult. Chris Christie was the top of the heap when he was showboating. In 2012, Herman Cain and Newt Gingrich and Michelle Bachmann, they had their moments then when they were showboating, and now there was a public policy poll this week that had Huckabee at the top of the pack right after he was showboating.
And let me say, I think you're right. I don't think it's not a conservative instinct, and it's not. But the definition of it's the opposite of conservative. It's not. But you are. I mean, touche. I mean, you make a valid point.
Now, there's another poll today that I don't think included Huckabee, so perhaps it doesn't give us enough information because Huckabee had not really been polling anywhere until public policy polling, I think, threw him in the mix right after this contraception flap. But the Washington Post poll that came out today had Paul Ryan, who had been polling, I think, either high single digits or low or sub-teens, and now at 20%, which, if you follow Republican early primary polls, few people have broken 20. It's always been pretty diffuse. With Christie had been sort of top of the pack in the high teens. Now Christie tumbles to 13. Ryan's at 20. Jeb is at 18. Following Christie in third place is Ted Cruz at 12, Rand Paul at 11, and Rubio at 10. So it's still pretty fractured. It's not like the Democratic side, which is Hillary at Kazillion and Biden and Warren, the bottom, which is not even a race at all. And yes, it's early, blah blah blah. But it does suggest that Christie is damaged. He vis-a-vis Hillary in this poll, he's down 12, where he was much more competitive in previous polling. And I don't know if it says a lot much about Ryan per se, just that with no other showboater in this poll right now, perhaps, and Cruz and Paul, I think, sort of cannibalize each other a bit. It still raises the question, I think, if Ryan doesn't run, there's still a question whether he's even running or not. If Jeb doesn't run, he's still not being conclusive about it. and Christie is damaged goods, does that leave a big opening for Rand Paul or Ted Cruz to have a Tea Party takeover? Or just whet Paul Ryan's appetite and make him rethink his pursuit of Ways and Means chair?
Yeah, I don't think Paul Ryan runs for president. And someone on Twitter today suggested that, oh yeah, this is John Nolte at Breitbart, that you could just swap out Scott Walker with Paul Ryan, the two Wisconsinites, and that Walker might inherit some of those votes. I don't, obviously we have to caution everyone, it's so early. It is interesting, but it's also sort of meaningless. It does strike me, though, that, you see these candidates like Paul Ryan, who, supports immigration reform and is not a darling of the Tea Party, at least, doing better. And so it does seem like, I think sometimes there's a sense that the grassroots so dramatically outnumbers the establishment, and that, like Ted Cruz owns that vote, that he would be unstoppable. But I think this poll does sort of imply that that's not necessarily the case. There are a lot of options, and that it's much more nuanced. I mean, where does Huckabee fit in? Where does Santorum fit in? Is there a social conservative vote that's different than the Tea Party that's not really being discussed? And then I think the establishment candidates seem to be stronger than I might have supposed. I mean, Christie understandably has dropped because of Bridgegate, but anyway, that's sort of my reading of it. I think that who's up and who's down is really irrelevant at this point. It's so ephemeral, but in the sense of the larger things it tells us about about politics and the conservative coalition, I think is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't look at this necessarily as a predictor of who is going to get the nomination, but it does seem like a one clue at the mindset of the Republican Party right now. And so where I would quibble with you is I don't think it's quite right to call the Ryan vote, such as it is right now. I mean, I don't know if this 20% is that hard a number. I think if you're inside Washington, you are very aware that Paul Ryan cut this budget deal and is pushing immigration. I don't know if the Republican base writ large grasps that, so there still might be, the Ayn Rand acolytes out there that still are giving Ryan some of that vote.
Yeah, but don't you think, he was Mitt Romney's running mate, so you would think that if nothing else, that would taint him a little bit amongst the grassroots.
In a negative light?
I would think so.
But he's still the guy behind the Ryan budget who wants to smash Medicare. I mean, I feel like his narrative is muddied right now. So which camp he fits in is confused right now. So I don't know, and I think it would depend on if he actually was running or say taking a much more higher profile role in immigration as it progresses. Would you be able to gauge what that 20% means?
But what about Rubio then? I mean, couldn't you use the same argument to say voters seem keenly aware that he committed apostasy on immigration reform? I mean, he got pretty beat around
on conservative talk radio for a good long stretch at the end of the year, and then he kind of surrendered on the subject, it seems like to me. He didn't really defend himself on it. And I think the combination of those two things have made him more of an afterthought for the moment, at least. He hasn't figured out how to get himself back in the spotlight and own an issue again. So I think that definitely drives his numbers down.
Yeah. The other thing about Ryan, too, I mean, the Ryan Murray budget deal, which, conservatives, I think, rightly disliked because it broke sequester. But, again, that maybe is too in the weeds for a lot of folks to... there are a lot of good reasons that the grassroots should turn on Paul Ryan, but it may be that he's kept his head down and avoided these things, drawing that much attention.
I mean, I'm still with you that I don't think he is actually running, and it looks like he's poised to play a bigger role in immigration. He's looking to do that, and once he does that, I'm sure that burns those bridges. If they aren't burned yet, they will get burned with the Tea Party base over the issue. And so each at that point, does that 20% number hold firm or go up or down? That would then tell us what the impact of immigration does to him. But going on the logic that Ryan's not really running, and Jeb is not really running. That's 38% of this poll, which is kind of up for grabs. And I'd say the Jeb 18 is clearly an establishment 18, that picking up some of what Christie had lost. And I think that 20% is a bit more nebulous where that goes. I feel other polling has suggested to me that the establishment share of the vote isn't that big. Or I'll correct myself. The establishment vote tends to be, I think, eventually around 40% or so. But some of that's scattered amongst Rubio and perhaps some other people in single digits, would account for that. So I feel it's still a little up in the air.
And let me say some of these issues, like as we speak, are about to become even more divisive. Republicans today are having, as we tape this, are having a retreat in Maryland, where the leadership, including Ryan, are arguing that the Republican Party should be the party of alternatives, which is going to include some form of immigration reform. This flies in the face of what people like Bill Kristol and Hugh Hewitt are advising, which is to do nothing. Don't do something, just stand there, whatever the expression is. That's what they're saying. And Hugh Hewitt was on Jake Tapper's CNN show The Lead yesterday, like literally saying, my advice is to do nothing this year.
No, I don't get the logic of that. I get the logic as a general rule that you're in a midterm election. It tends to be a referendum on the president to some degree, and if you just stymie the president and the president's party from doing things, you get people's angry votes by default if you're in the opposition. So I get that base logic, but if you're a Republican, you already have the House. You already have the ability to stymie the president's agenda, which they generally do, with some notable exceptions. And the Republican Party, as a brand, has a deeper problem of being taken seriously as a governing party that can't be. I would not think can be so easily fixed in a sprint of a presidential general election. You want to spend some time mending that. So why not get to work on that? You're not going to lose the House by opposing alternatives. You'll lose the House by having a giant shutdown again, which I'm not saying.
Nobody's even worried about losing the House.
Well, right. So what are you losing by opposing alternatives? You might as well get that process going and work out those muscles again, so you're ready to do a mano in 2016.
Well, first of all, I think this comes down to long-term branding decisions versus short-term gain. And I do think you can definitely make an argument that the smart short-term strategic move is to do nothing, to follow the advice of Hewitt and Kristol and others, because of a couple reasons. One, there is no worry of losing the House, but Republicans think they can take the Senate this year. They think the trajectory set. That why do anything to mess that up? Why alienate the conservative base? It seems like they're poised to win, to have a good year when the focus is on Obamacare and on Obama's failures. Why mess anything up? They have a more substantive argument, whether or not it's sophistry, I'll let you determine, but that because Obama can't be trusted to actually implement the law the way that he's made unilateral decisions about postponing aspects of Obamacare, that they can't trust him to actually follow the letter of the law on immigration. So they've got the substantive argument, and they have the strategic argument. And so I do think it makes a lot of sense from a short-term strategic standpoint to just sort of do nothing. But the the other question, which I think you raise, is when is it ever smart to do anything? And that sometimes if you want to change a long-term branding problem, you have to start somewhere, and there may be some short-term cost associated to it. And aren't Republicans just postponing making this decision? And so, and it's sort of like, there's a line from some movie that's like drinking Drano. It'll fill you up but leave you hollow inside. And this is like, the short term, like, if your goal is let's just get to tomorrow, let's just live another day, let's just do whatever we can to win one more election, then maybe you do A. If your goal is, man, we need to like seriously reinvent ourselves and make some serious changes, then maybe you do B. But either way, my point is we're about to see a fight on the right again because the leadership has decided that they want to rebrand and that they want to be seen as a viable alternative and a party of solutions. And I think a lot of other people have decided, no, let's just batten down the hatches. And I predict that you're going to see a clash where Boehner and Ryan and others are called sellouts. There's nothing new, but I think we're about to relive it again in the very near future.
And I know it's not just about immigration. There's a general principle here about proposing alternatives, I understand. But immigration is still pretty front and center. And we know that at this retreat this week, or as we speak, the Boehner's team, with the help of Ryan, are circulating a set of principles. It's not actual legislation. It doesn't resolve every detail that would need to be resolved, but it suggests a desire to actually pass something. And one of those, and it holds out the notion of legalization of those currently undocumented here, but stopping short of a special path to citizenship. And this is a very dicey subject. There's some people in the immigration reform community who say stopping the deportations is paramount. We can accept legalization and not full citizenship for now. And other folks, AFL-CIO in particular, and Pelosi said some of her comments yesterday saying there has to be citizenship, there has to be full rights. We can't have an underclass. There's way too much worker exploitation that will go on if they don't have those rights, and so we can't abide by that. And sort of in the middle is a guy named Frank Shari, who's with one of the immigration groups, who said it's okay if you don't have a special path to citizenship. You can put them on the regular path to citizenship if you loosen that path up, and so it doesn't take 20 years. If you do some other reforms there that everyone who applies to citizenship can take advantage of, that was potentially acceptable. So I don't know if Boehner is going to, resolve all of that in these in his initial set of principles. Right. But he's wading in at least. Do you think that Boehner is going to, if he gets pushback from the right at this retreat, he's going to say, forget it, I don't want to divide the party in a midterm election year. I tested the waters, they're too cold, screw it. Or is he ready to push? Is he going to say, look, we're doing this one way or the other?
If he's testing the waters, then he's stupid because there's icebergs floating in the water. You don't have to dip your toe in to know these waters are freezing cold. He knows what he's getting into. I have to imagine he knows how dangerous and divisive this issue is on the right. It really is a tough issue. And I can't imagine he doesn't know what he's getting into. So
you think he pushes on?
I mean, I don't know why he would even raise it unless he intended to do something. It would just be stirring up trouble for no reason. Again, there's no sort of floating a trial balloon. We know this is going to be a big deal that receives a ton of pushback. So there's no sense to test the waters. The waters are icy. Look, having said that, I do want to address the legalization versus citizenship question because I think it's an interesting one, and I have kind of a nuanced opinion on it. So on one hand, obviously, it's all about politics. So the Democrats want citizenship because they want votes. Republicans like Boehner think maybe this is the compromise, because the thing that Republicans are really afraid about is enfranchising a whole bunch of liberal voters. And so if they're not citizens and they can't vote, so maybe that's, he thinks, the compromise. So whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, the compromise, or this sort of legalization but not citizenship thing, is all about politics. Now, from a strategic standpoint, I would oppose it, because I think what Republicans need to do is to get past the immigration issue, and this keeps it alive. So once you give them legalization, the next campaign opens up about second-class citizens and how horrible Republicans are, that they don't want them to have the right to vote. So in my opinion, this just prolongs the pain and the agony for Republicans.
You want to lance the boil.
Yeah, if you're going to do it, you got to pull the Band-Aid off all at one time. And so from a political standpoint, I really don't like this idea. It's, in my opinion, the worst of both worlds. You have, the things that populists like Mickey Kaus don't like about, immigrants taking jobs and from blue-collar workers. But the Republicans still get beat up for being horrible people who want to disenfranchise these great hardworking people. Now, from a policy standpoint, I actually have to say, I think it makes more sense than a lot of people think. I would really oppose any sort of situation where we create second-class citizenship. But this is a very temporary thing. Like, number one, I think surveys would bear this out, that most illegal immigrants don't really care about becoming citizens. They just want to be able to work here and be legal. So they really, that's the thing that the left is pushing for political reasons. I don't believe that most illegal immigrants care that much about citizenship. They just don't want to be deported. They don't want to be, under threat of deportation. They want to be able to live here and take care of their families. They couldn't, most of them. Now, I'm sure there are some, but most of them I don't think care that much about citizenship. And as long as we don't have the anchor baby thing happen, I don't see this as being like a huge problem. Because if you're an illegal immigrant who attains legal status, your children who are born here would then become full legal citizens. And so we would have a little bit of time for, immersion and acclimation. And then if they want, maybe they're more likely to vote Democratic, less likely, I don't know. But it's not like a prolonged situation where we're creating generations and generations of second-class citizens. Their children would be American citizens, certainly as long as I have anything to do with it or say about it. And so in my opinion, it would just be a short-term thing and not a huge problem. That's my take on it, Bill. Love to hear what you think.
Well, I don't agree that it's all about raw politics and votes on the left, but I just think that there is, as Frank Scher pointed, I mean, there is an obvious middle ground here. There's obviously a path to citizenship generally exists in the country. It's like there's no path. The question is, how do you get those currently undocumented on that path? Do you create a parallel track? You put them on the same track as everybody else? I mean, I think you can do that in the latter way. And in a way, if right now the Senate bill has a path that's 13 years, but if they did it the old way, it would be 20 years. You could find a way to make it 17 years, and it's not that big of a compromise. It's not like it's instant votes. It's not like it changes the complexity of elections today. It gives Republicans 17 years to figure out how to win those votes over. So I don't feel that's a slam dunk, points in the D column. And the question just becomes, is the will there? If the Republican leadership and Democratic leadership want to find a solution, that solution is there on the table, essentially. There is a way to slice this up.
Right.
And my sense is that Boehner doesn't want to do it. And that his hiring of Becky Talent suggests that he wants to do it. The fact he's taking it this far suggests that he wants to do it. Most of the Republican money class wants to do it. Most of the Karl Rove political class wants to do it. There's lots of people that want to do this.
But you do get that this means war. That Rush Limbaugh and Mark Levin and Eric Erickson and essentially anybody on the Tea Party grassroots right won't just have a sort of tepid response to this. And I think it doesn't even matter at this point how modest it is, right? So there was initially a notion that, well, the problem is that it's comprehensive reform. What we need to do is to break these into smaller things and, pass border security first. And then, I'm now of the opinion that for a variety of reasons, there will be strong opposition to anything that is called in any way immigration reform.
Well, and the National Review editorial already started to move those goalposts. Whoa. When we said piecemeal, we didn't mean just break up the bill in pieces.
Right.
We meant that you pass something completely insignificant today and do all the big stuff 20 years from now.
The obvious point, too, is, look, I don't like Obama, and I do think he has done things, like just sort of unilaterally deciding things that he's going to enforce and that he's not going to enforce, that I think overstep his bounds. Having said that, if your argument is we can only pass something when we have the White House, then that's an obvious catch-22 situation, because then the other guys say, well, we're not going to pass anything when you're in the White House. This is like an obvious point, and it's like it's almost too silly to bring up, but it is kind of childish.
Well, even worse, you might lose more seats eventually, and the Democrats will pass an even bigger liberal bill that you'll really hate.
Exactly, and it's not like President Obama is going to be in the White House forever. You could make a good argument that the trends would imply he won't, that he won't be, that Democrats won't be in the White House in 2016.
You and I both know there'll be a false flag operation in 2016. They'll change the Constitution so Obama will be president for life. So come on, let's get real here.
If that happens, then we've got bigger problems than immigration reform. You know what I'm saying? That scenario, whether it's absurd or not, immigration reform would then be a moot point. So, we're talking about leadership, about Republican leadership. One of the people who will be standing on stage today in Maryland at the Republican retreat. And by the way, let me say, too many Republican retreats, too many Republican meetings, or maybe I'm just hearing about them more often, but they just need to quit doing these things and certainly quit letting the press go to them. But having said that, one of the people on stage with John Boehner will be Representative Cathy McMorris Rodgers, who gave the official Republican response to the State of the Union Tuesday night and got pretty much glowing reviews. Some people thought that she was talking down like she was talking to children, a criticism that I've heard made of Al Gore and Hillary Clinton in the past. But having said that, I think she did a really good job of responding, and I wrote about it at the Daily Caller, and I think that, one of the things that separates her from the Michelle Bachmans and the Sarah Palins of the world is that she basically has spent several years just sort of doing the hard work of being a member of Congress, and it's not like she's been invisible, but not seeking fame or publicity, or at least putting a lot more effort and emphasis on being a good legislator. Maybe she's not a perfect conservative, but she certainly has paid her dues, and I think that it is possible that she could be a real rising star and someone who built her foundation on the rock, not on the sand. And, somebody who is, rather than an example of trotting out a woman as a form of tokenism to undermine the war on women, canard that she actually could be someone who is a legitimate example of success, and someone who I think could be someone we're going to see a lot more of in the future. I don't know if you saw it, Bill, or if you have a take on that, but that's my take.
Well, I did see it. I think glowing is strong, but it certainly was the best of what we've had in the Obama era. She did not become a laughingstock, which is I think a massive success as far as your responses go. I think she was a solid face. It didn't seem angry. It didn't seem strident. It didn't seem off the cliff ideological. It was it was a warm and inviting speech. I mean, we can quibble about the condescension and whatnot. I mean, I think all politicians get tagged for being condescending at one point in their lives or another. But one thing I found a little weird about it, it's not unique to her response. I think it's true for a lot of responses. She spent a lot of time on herself and her personal story and her family, and I always thought that's not the responses I grew up with, at least from what I can remember. I feel like they're supposed to be the response. You're giving the party response to the policies that were proposed in the State of the Union address, and when you lead off with 5 minutes of your personal story, it seems like your own campaign ad.
I would disagree. I hear what you're saying. First of all, I think we both acknowledge the challenges of giving a State of the Union response. Before McMorris Rodgers, probably the best response in the Obama era actually came from embattled former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell, who did it at like the Virginia Assembly in front of a crowd. And but it's tough, the trappings of the State of the Union speech and the pomp and circumstance, and then you go to someone sitting in a room by themselves. So that's why I would say that the fact that she did well is incredibly impressive, because the corpses of the political corpses of people who didn't do it well, are sort of litter that stage.
Well, speaking of the RNC meeting, other RNC news that's breaking as we have been taping is the RNC chair, Reince Priebus, is announcing a boycott of MSNBC. He is banning all RNC members. I mean, he can't control every elected official, but he's saying everyone from the RNC is not allowed to appear on MSNBC until Phil Griffin, I forget what title Phil Griffin has, I think he's essentially the chief executive, until he personally apologizes for this tweet that was done. Forgive me if I don't get the words quite right, but it was about this Cheerios ad that it features a biracial family, and there was some racist backlash to it when the first read of it came out, and there was a tweet that said, the right wingers may hate it, but this Cheerios ad is adorable. I think it's what the gist of it was, and a lot of conservatives were upset at the tweet, and on the MSNBC Twitter feed, they deleted the tweet. They apologized for it. I think Richard Wolff apologized for it. Who's also one of the executives there. But Priebus is saying that specifically Phil Griffin has to apologize for the boycott there, which strikes me as is a little weird because you've already had an apology. So what's do you understand, brother, that I'm understanding it?
No, I mean, I guess a couple things. One, I think it was an egregious tweet. I mean, implying that the right-wingers don't like biracial marriage, and really no evidence to support that other than some comments on a YouTube. And so, yes, MSNBC did apologize, and they deleted the tweet, and they basically said that it doesn't represent their values. This strikes me, though, as a sort of a Freudian slip kind of definition of a Washington gaffe, where they probably revealed what they really believe that conservatives are like, which is obviously problematic. It's also ironic because Melissa Harris Perry, recently mocked Mitt Romney's biracial or his black grandson,
let's be
his biracial family.
A guest on her show. I mean, she was silent while someone else said something disparaging, and then she apologized subsequently.
That's very good distinction, Bill. Thanks for. We always want to be clear here, and things get shorthanded. So that was a controversy, obviously. But having said that, I think this is gimmickry for Reince Priebus to insert himself. Michelle Malkin had this really cool hashtag going on Twitter, pound my right-wing biracial family, where you had real conservative families posting pictures of them and their kids, and their biracial families. And that seems to me a much more effective sort of guerrilla campaign. Now Reince Priebus has essentially inserted himself, cast him and the RNC as the opposition to MSNBC on this. And I think it's maybe it's good for them, but I don't necessarily. If your goal is to draw attention to MSNBC, this doesn't do that. I think it diverts attention and makes the RNC part of the story. It's also kind of a liberal move to threaten to boycott somebody and to demand public apologies. How many insincere apologies are enough? They've already gotten one or two. Now they need to like humiliate Phil Griffin and get him to do it too. So it seems absurd to me.
Well, I just see this is. We talked about this a little bit in a past show. I just think the conservative movement is kind of gripped in a political correctness mode, and well, maybe this is not fair to put it in that. In this way, it's sort of the RNC acting like politically correct. You have been politically incorrect by suggesting there is any kind of overlap between conservatism and racism. And therefore, I will wag my finger and make you apologize repeatedly. But it just seems to me like there is a focus on fighting these liberal media bugaboos, and less attention on how do we implement the RNC autopsy that Reince Priebus issued, which has important but difficult recommendations to restore the Republican brand. Instead they get so easily sidetracked with these with these hot button flaps.
Right. You're right, and I mean Priebus just number one, too many of these meetings, as I've said before. But they just had this RNC winter meeting where Priebus was pushing through this idea to shorten the calendar. To have the convention earlier. I mean, those are the kind of things that an RNC chairman ought to be doing. And despite the fact that Mike Huckabee sort of created, problems by, the speeches and whatnot, and having the media there. I mean, there is a role for the RNC to raise money and to handle these sort of logistical infrastructure things. But here we have Priebus. I think it's a gimmick. It's a stunt, and I think maybe it does work for the RNC. Maybe it gets him attention, but I think it's probably counterproductive. Rather than talking about MSNBC in the tweet, you're talking about Reince Priebus versus MSNBC, and I just think that the hashtag idea was much better. Never don't interfere with your opponent when they're in the process of destroying themselves. So I think that's yet another example, in my opinion. Maybe I'll be proven wrong. Maybe Phil Griffin will give them their apology, and it'll.
Well, why wouldn't he? I mean, they already apologized. What's the harm of him apologizing? It's not like it's a new thing for MSNBC to do. It's reiterating an old apology, so it seems like it's going to be a very short boycott. But I mean, I can understand it more. Let's face it. I mean, the left spent a long time trying to besmirch the reputation of Fox as a fair and balanced network. That was a big project of the left throughout the course of the Bush years. There was a certain degree of pressure, I think, to have Democrats not go on, or at least, if they do go on, to not, be prostrate in going on, and at least stand up for, no one got mad at Anthony Weiner when he went on, when he was kind of taking it to, the Fox hosts. But I think there was a strategic objective there, because Fox was, from the liberals' perspective, masquerading as a news channel. Having this fair and balanced rep when really it was pushing, a Republican Party line. So they wanted to strip off that mask. MSNBC, I wouldn't call them, DNC propaganda. I think there's a wide range of views on the network, but it is pretty manifestly progressive, with the exception of Morning Joe and Chuck Todd and a few others. I think they're being pretty open about that for their primetime lineup. So what are you exposing here?
Well, and you're right. You note the primetime lineup, which is an important distinction. But I mean, part of the problem too is their association with NBC News and Andrew Mitchell and Chuck Todd, Mark Murray right now, the political director. I think he's the political director. Maybe he's the assistant political director. Whatever Mark Murray is, and he's a nice guy. I like him personally, but he's under some fire now for a tweet he sent out yesterday, and Red State's Eric Erickson has been pounding him on that. He's certainly a news guy, an NBC news guy who does MSNBC stuff sometimes. So there is a danger that this, hits the Chuck Todds of the world, and that it makes it harder for Morning Joe and Daily Rundown to get guests like Reince Priebus, Paul Ryan, Christie, yada yada yada. So I mean, there is certainly a danger that there could be some sort of real repercussions from this, but I just don't get why there's a need to telegraph when you're going to do something, right? So, like for example, when the NRSC decided to blacklist this Republican strategy group who was helping conservatives try to oust Mitch McConnell and others, they announced it that we're going to blacklist this group, right? Now, when the RNC is going to discourage people from going on MSNBC, they feel the need to issue a press release and demand apologies. Why not just do it? Why do you have to call attention to it? Wouldn't it be arguably more effective if just for some reason MSNBC could never get Paul Ryan or Tom Coburn back on? Right. That's assuming the RNC could actually talk them into following their lead. But I just don't get the whole thing about you're declaring something to be so and needing to do that.
Well, I think we move. I think this boycott is going to last about 24 hours until.
I'm going to boycott you in this show.
Well, we need to wrap up, but you had a very interesting podcast this week I want you to share with folks.
Yeah, no, I mentioned it earlier, but I just want to reiterate. Check it out. We had Alyssa Rosenberg, who was, she's a cultural critic at Think Progress. She has a dialogue here, talks about movies and entertainment. And she and I had a great conversation about Jay-Z and Beyonce and marriage. They may or may not be good influences, but I think she and I both agree that that they make marriage look sexy, and maybe that's if you're a conservative and you want to encourage people to get married, which we believe has all sorts of societal salutary benefits, and including reducing poverty and income inequality. That Jay-Z and Beyonce, despite how you feel about them, they make marriage look good. And so check out that podcast on iTunes. Search for Matt Lewis and you'll find it. Also, check us out here on Twitter at DMZ Show and on Facebook /DMZ Show. Always good talking with you, Bill Scher.
Always good talking to you. Have a good Super Bowl Sunday. I look forward to your wrap-up post-game next week.
It's going to be play-by-play. We're going to go through film, devote the entire next show to the Super Bowl. Absolutely.
I'm just going to read my Twitter feed from Sunday.
Sounds good.
All right, take care.
All right, man.